A desperate air traffic controller uses his newfound abilities to win back his girlfriend. In the LAX air traffic control tower, Max purchases his lunch from a vendor hawking sandwiches to the busy employees. After work, the man heads to his car in the parking lot where he sees two teens scratching other vehicles with a key. Thankfully, he arrived just in time before they reached his car, so Max scares off the delinquents. On the drive home, he opens the sunroof but the handle breaks off. Unfortunately, he gets stuck behind a truck transporting chickens, and their feathers stick to his windshield when it starts to rain. Max tries to close the sunroof, but he's unable to reattach the broken handle. His terrible luck continues when the radio chews up the cassette, unraveling the tape. As the man parks, a metal pipe on the sidewalk scratches the side of the car, leaving damage worse than what the teenagers would have. Inside the apartment, he listens to a voicemail message from his girlfriend Darcy, who says she moved out and took the cat with her. The woman explains that she's had enough of his jealous behavior, such as paying waiters to spy on her during business lunches, calling her mother if she's not home by 7:30 p.m., and planting a bugging device inside her purse. After checking the dresser to make sure Darcy did take all her things, Max sits on the bed and stares at her framed picture. Seconds later, he opens the drawer on the bedside table and sees that she also took her prophylactic, further feeding his worries. That evening, Max heads to their favorite restaurant, Dubrovnik's, and solemnly watches the couples dining around him. As he scans the room, he locks eyes with a flirty brunette and asks the waiter to send over a martini. The grateful woman mouths her thanks and suggestively eats the olive from the drink. Suddenly, her date returns, but she continues looking over at Max. Then, he notices the other diners flirting with people from across the room despite being on dates with their significant others, prompting the exasperated man to leave the establishment. While walking home, Max sees a mannequin in a storefront window and pretends he's talking to Darcy. He says he'll do everything in his power to control himself and prove that he trusts her, then plants a kiss on the glass. To his surprise, he finds his girlfriend waiting for him in the apartment. She says she feels guilty ending their relationship over the phone. However, she adds that even if things didn't work out between them, she'll always love him. Seeing this as an opportunity to make things right, Max states that he's aware he hasn't been communicating with her lately, but when he's unable to find the words to win her back, Darcy disappointedly leaves. Angry at himself, the man kicks a beanbag, and the tear causes its contents to spill on the floor. The next day, the man hangs out with his ex-wife, Lorraine, who tells him that she knew it was only a matter of time before Darcy had enough of his controlling behavior. He says the girlfriend spends more time having lunch with strangers, so the woman explains that meeting with salesmen is part of her job. While waiting by a food cart, Max suggests they have dinner at her place that night. Lorraine jokes that they might sleep with each other, but the man responds with a negative retort. The woman points out his pessimistic tendencies and says he should have a positive outlook on life, just like a man in a wheelchair passing by. Suddenly, the paraplegic man, Brian, recognizes Max from high school and introduces his maid, Dorita. Lorraine asks what the man does for a living, and he says he owns a publishing house. Then, he invites the pair to a press party that evening for his client, Mark Winslow's latest book. That night, Max thinks Brian gave them the wrong address because they're in a club catering to men who are attracted to men. However, they see the wheelchair-bound man calling from the second floor, much to Max's annoyance. Brian tells the pair that his client chose the venue because he finds the patrons admirable for being true to themselves. While Max heads to the restroom, Lorraine tells the publisher how much she admires his success despite his condition. Concurrently, Max sees Darcy with her friend Barry, a theatrical producer who the man knows is attracted to the girlfriend. When he explains that he's there for the press party, Barry says Mark Winslow was his mentor. Later, Lorraine introduces Mark to Max. Then the heartbroken man says he's heading out early. On the drive home, green liquid spills from the truck ahead of him. Because the sunroof's still open, the substance sprinkles on him through the opening. Unbeknownst to Max, the green liquid is nuclear waste. As he enters the apartment, the man glows green, and he goes directly to sleep without changing his clothes. In his dream, Max flies across the sky like a plane while communicating with Darcy as his air traffic controller. However, Barry appears and distracts the woman, causing the man to crash on the runway. Concurrently, the girlfriend's framed picture levitates above the bedside table, flies across the room, and breaks when it hits the wall. The next day, Max's coffee mug slides out of his reach every time he tries to grab it. Suddenly, all the objects in the kitchen start moving and shaking, spooking the man. Later, Brian notices how Max seems distracted and wonders if he's upset that he slept with Lorraine last last night, the man says he doesn't mind that the friend's dating his ex-wife, then recounts how he's seeing objects around his house move on their own. However, the wheelchair-bound man thinks he was just upset with a breakup and trashed the apartment. While taking a shower, the bar of soap slips out of Max's hands and lands on the litter box. To test if he has telekinetic powers, the man moves the soap into the sink and turns the faucet on with his mind. That night, he dines alone at a restaurant and nonchalantly uses his newfound ability to stack sugar cubes on the table. Moments later, Darcy and Barry walk in and the situation quickly turns awkward. After the pair sit at their table, the theatrical producer approaches the lonely man and insists his interest in the woman is simply friendship. However, he adds that the sooner Max admits that the relationship is over, the faster Darcy is gonna move on with her life. When he returns to the table, Barry smugly places his hand on the woman's, but she indifferently moves hers away and goes to the restroom. Eager to mess with the arrogant man, Max uses his powers to make Barry's nose bleed. At first, the theatrical producer brushes it off and says it's nothing serious. However, when the blood sprays all over the table, the waiters insist on taking him to the hospital. When Darcy returns, Max explains the situation and offers to find her a taxicab so she can go home. By the sidewalk, the man begs for her to take him back, but she's skeptical that he'll ever change his controlling ways. Eventually, she says she'll call him tomorrow about possibly going on a date with him. Before the woman gets in the cab, they share a passionate kiss. The next day, Max calls Darcy, who says she can't go out because she promised Barry she'd watch his ballet tonight. In his anger, the man subconsciously causes the airplane ashtray to fly across the room and crash on the wall, astonishing his coworker. That evening, Max sits in the audience and uses his powers to ruin the show by causing the lead dancer to slide off the stage, throwing him into the fake backdrop and inflating his costume. The audience erupts in disappointed murmurs and Barry hides his face behind his hands in shame. Later that night, the theatrical producer takes the woman home and asks why she won't let him in her apartment. So Darcy reminds him that even though she knows he's attracted to her, she doesn't feel the same way. While at the door, the woman swings at the person behind her, thinking it's a vagrant there to assault her. When she realizes it's Max, she apologizes and invites him inside. Minutes later, the pair make love and the man uses his powers to pleasure Darcy. However, after thoroughly satisfying his girlfriend, he feels remorseful and confesses that the sensations she experienced were artificial. The woman thinks he needs time to relax and mentions that Lorraine invited them to spend a few days in Brian's beach house. During the drive, Max tries to open up about his new powers, but the girlfriend shoots down the topic because she doesn't believe in telekinesis. Soon, they reach the destination and when Darcy points out how happy Lorraine seems lately, the latter says it's because she's in love. In the kitchen, the ex-wife introduces the girlfriend to Dorita. Then, the voodoo-practicing maid pulls out the dressed chicken's innards, looks at the bumps, and says something crazy is about to happen in the house this weekend. In the den, the publisher asks the friend if he still sees things move, and the latter says he's making them move with his mind now. Seconds later, the women return with their drinks, and Max ingests the entire glass in one gulp. Then, Lorraine takes the guests to their room and the man immediately lays on the bed. Meanwhile, Mark arrives and heads to the kitchen where he inappropriately touches the annoyed Dorita. Later, the arrogant man sees the couple and insists they stay in the maid's room because he's always slept in the guest room whenever he's at the beach house. Because he's in no mood to argue, Max starts grabbing their things and says he has no problem staying in Dorita's quarters. Before the man leaves, Mark clarifies that he didn't strong-arm him into switching rooms because he thinks he's weak, but because he knows he's right. Eventually, Lorraine takes the couple to Dorita's room and finds that it's covered in voodoo ceremonial objects. Max picks up a love doll and the ex-wife explains that the maid uses it because she's in love with a gardener. Dorita appears and apologizes for the mess. Then she crouches down by the bed and takes out her pet iguana. Before she leaves, she tells the couple that if they see a mouse, they shouldn't hurt it because it's Randy and he lives in the house. When Darcy has difficulty opening the window, Max uses his powers to help her out. Later, the girlfriend asks the man if he'd like to join her for a walk on the beach, but he says he'll stay and rest for a while. After she leaves, Max sees sees the white mouse scurrying on the floor and he uses his telekinesis to suspend the animal in midair. By the beach, the writer dictates words and phrases into the tape recorder around his neck. Then, when he sees Darcy, he approaches and offers his expertise as a therapist to help her navigate the end of her relationship with Max. However, the woman politely declines and says that she and her boyfriend will be able to work through their problems together. Meanwhile, as the troubled man closes the window in Dorita's room, he sees Mark flirting with his girlfriend. Later, Darcy stops by the kitchen to see if the maid needs help preparing dinner. Then, Dorita says she noticed Max's aura, which she describes as bright green with yellow spots, and warns the woman to keep an eye on her boyfriend. In the bedroom, the sickly man sits on the bed with a blank look while various toys and trinkets float and move around him. When Darcy opens the door, he snaps out of his trance and asks how her talk with Mark went. Sensing the man's jealousy, she assures him that he has nothing to worry about because she isn't attracted to the writer. Moments later, she stares at Max's face and mentions how his aura glows green with yellow spots. Worried, he runs to the mirror and sees that she's right. However, only he can see the changes, and the woman insists she was just joking. After Darcy gets dressed for dinner, Mark calls her into his room where he tries to seduce her by dropping the towel around his waist and admitting that he finds her attractive. However, the woman ignores his advances and turns around to leave. Unfortunately, Max sees her leaving the writer's room and thinks she cheated on him. During dinner, Mark gives the others unsolicited advice from a therapist's standpoint. When he jokes about Max passing him the potatoes using his powers, the troubled man realizes Brian told the writer what he'd shared in confidence. Mark continues that Max likes being the center of attention, which is why he's been telling everyone about a made-up illness. Then, he hands the girlfriend a calling card in case she'd like help dealing with her disturbed boyfriend. Suddenly, the fed-up Max uses his powers and lights the calling card on fire. The perplexed writer douses the flame in his glass of water, and everyone wonders what happened. Then, Max uses his telekinesis to lift Mark's seat off the floor, proving to everyone in the room that he wasn't lying about his abilities. When the maid steps into the dining room, she sees the levitating man, forms a cross using two corn cobs, and backs away to the door. Seconds later, Max drags the terrified man across the wall and moves his body to the table. After kissing the writer on the forehead, he spins the man around several times before dropping him face first on the plate of mashed potatoes. Embarrassed, Mark gets back up on his feet and storms out of the house. Then, Max excuses himself to return to his room and Darcy follows. When Brian says they shouldn't invite him back to the beach house again, Lorraine disagrees because she knows that's not who he really is. However, when they hear crashing noises from the second floor, she changes her mind and agrees never to have Max over again. Later, the distraught writer walks into the ocean, so Lorraine convinces him that life's still worth living, especially since he just bought a new car. Meanwhile, Darcy finds Max levitating above the bed, and when she tries to touch him, he screams for her to stay away. The man sobs and says he blew his only chance of winning his girlfriend back. Then, he causes a vase to fall on his head as punishment. Minutes later, Darcy runs to the kitchen and begs Dorita for help. At first, the maid refuses, fearing they might be dealing with a demon. But when the girlfriend says she'll call a doctor, the voodoo practitioner finally concedes because she fears a clueless physician might do more harm than good. Concurrently, Mark grabs a pistol from his car to exact his revenge. In the bedroom, Dorita tries to scare what she believes is a demon from the man's body. However, Max begins crawling on the wall, so the maid sprinkles a special powder in a circle around the bed to try and contain him. To the woman's surprise, the man gets on his knees and snorts the substance. While Max suspends Dorita in midair, Mark barges in and fires his pistol at him. However, the telekinetic man stops the bullet and pushes the writer through the ceiling. Then, Max climbs up to the attic and through a window until he's on the roof landing. Darcy chases after her boyfriend, who's holding on to the antenna, and begs him not to do anything rashly because she loves him. The man says he's turned into a monster, and whenever he sees the woman with other men, he gets angry and makes bad things happen. So she asks him why she'd go up to the roof if she didn't love him, finally convincing Max. Suddenly, lightning strikes the antenna, causing the kitchen TV to glow. Seconds later, a burst of green light shoots toward Dorita, knocking her down to the floor. On the roof, the couple shares a passionate reconciliatory kiss and they see Randy the mouse. When an invisible force transports the animal down the chimney, Darcy asks if the boyfriend did it, and he swears it wasn't him. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Dorita sits in a chair while using her newly acquired powers to do the chores.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.